We have so much to deal with here, and we have three great readings for the Eucharist, and we have two wonderful feasts coming up this week that we won't be able to deal with, unfortunately. The Feast of the Holy Cross on Monday and Our Lady of Sorrows on Tuesday. I wish we had time to do that too, but we can't. So we're going to focus on the Gospel, and I will return at the end to the other two readings because I think they fit very nicely. But let's focus on this amazing Gospel story. First of all, parables are not meant to produce a warm, fuzzy feeling in us, like, They're meant to produce a feeling of, what? What? What was that? They're supposed to be slightly upsetting. We're not supposed to really know for sure what it's all about. And I think there are pieces of that ambiguity in today's story. But what does happen often in the gospel text is that the gospel author frames a parable, puts it in a situation, nudging us in a direction toward one interpretation. And that is certainly true with this one. This is in chapter 18, which is one of the 5 great discourses in Matthew's gospel. The first one is the Sermon on the Mount. Everybody's familiar with that. And then come ones on missionary activity and on parables. And this is the 4th one. It is about community relationships. Everything in chapter 18 is about how we should deal with each other in community. And this is a central piece, this parable. At the end of each of these discourses, you have this signal that says, now when Jesus finished saying these things, he did such and such. So that's the context for this parable. And I'm glad that we use the NRSV and not the New American NAB, because it, in its interest in pastoral relevance, it tends to obscure a couple of details that the NRSV really does put in there. One of which is the amounts of money. The NAB just says a great deal of money, a little money. And it also softens the slaves. It calls them servants, but we're dealing here with slaves, enslaved persons. Slavery is taken for granted in the New Testament world because it is an institution that is all pervasive. There are slave characters in the gospel, like the servant in the arrest narrative in the garden who loses an ear, and then that story in the Passion narrative moves to the high priest's courtyard, and you have a woman there who says to Peter, surely you were with him. She also is an enslaved person. The woman named Rhoda in Acts 12 at the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, who slams the door in Peter's face because she thinks he's a ghost. And of course, the unnamed woman with a prophetic spirit in Philippi in Acts 16, Onesimus in Paul's letter to Philemon. And then we have the household codes, the so-called household codes, where wives are to submit to their husbands. We pay more attention to that now, but also children to fathers and slaves to masters, which has caused unaccountable trouble, as you can imagine. There are other parables of Jesus involving slaves, and one of them is the parable of the talents. If you remember, the Lord entrusts 5, 2, and 1 talent to 3 different slaves, enslaved people, which brings us to today's parable, which also has to do with talents. In this story, the central character owes 10,000 talents. Now, in the context of Jesus, if he was telling this story, people's heads would have just shot up because it's an unbelievable amount of money. It's billions of dollars. One of the notes in the NRSV says that somebody has figured out that it would take a worker 15 years to earn 1 talent. So this tells us that we're in the realm of imagination. It's rhetorical exaggeration to be sure that we really get the idea that this is an unimaginable amount of money. And the fellow slave owes 100 denarii. Well, a denarius was the basic payment for a day of work. If you remember the parable of the workers in the vineyard. It's a denarius that he agrees to pay them, whether they've worked all day or 1 hour, but the standard wage is the denarius. So you get the idea of this enormous contrast between what the main character owes and what the other fellow slave owes him. And that's deliberate to really stress that we're dealing here with differences, huge differences. So apparently the king needs cash, and he is going to call in his debts. And there is no way this slave is going to be able to pay 10,000 talents, even though he says, have patience with me and I'll pay it all back. Well, totally unrealistic, but the whole debt is unrealistic to begin with. So he's not going to be able to pay it back. And yet the king is not cruel. He just wants his money. And when the slave begs him, he's moved with, this translation says pity. You could also say compassion. He's moved with compassion. The word there is splachnistes, which the splankna are the intestines. It's the really deep part of the person where you feel strong emotion. And that word is often used of Jesus when he has compassion on someone whom he's about to heal. So the king is, he's not an impossible person, you know. He really listens and is able to be moved with compassion and let the whole thing go, which is what he cannot do, this central character cannot do with his fellow slaves. This story, of course, is an illustration of a line in the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us. There are other examples. It's always fun to look at sayings of the gospel or short stories and see how they're illustrated. You know, another example is the parable of the two sons, the one who says, yes, I'll do it, but doesn't, and the other says, no, I won't do it, but does anyway. And I think that one's really enacted in the so-called prodigal son story. Well, this one really is an acting out, a dramatization of that line in the Our Father. And so, the translation we use now, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Well, what does it really mean to trespass against somebody unless you're walking on their property or something? You know, that's language that we automatically say, but I don't think we really think very seriously about it. Whereas Luke's version of that is much clearer. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us, as we forgive our debtors. And it's another way of saying, do to others as you would have others do unto you, the famous golden rule. I wonder how much we realize that every time we attend Eucharist, say the Rosary, recite the Our Father in some other context, every time we're driving that bargain with God. We're saying, God, you only have to forgive us to the extent that we're forgiving others. It's a kind of a deal, you know, an understanding that is rather frightening, I think. And that is what this man cannot do. That is what he is incapable of understanding. Is he stupid or what? And I want to suggest something. Given the understanding that this is a story, that there's no claim here that this really happened. It's a story, it's an illustration. Nevertheless, We are becoming today more and more aware of the legacy of slavery, of the legacy of oppression and discrimination, the scars that it leaves on people, what it was like to actually live in slavery. The sources, the publications are coming out much more now that reach people's actual experience. And I'm just wondering if in this story, this man is so traumatized by his situation of slavery. He's about to be sold with his whole family. He has this crushing debt that he will never be able to get rid of. What if he doesn't really hear the words that the king says that your debt is forgiven? What if he's so traumatized he doesn't hear it and he doesn't realize that his entire situation has changed and he is so desperate for anything that he reacts in that way to the other slave who owes the amount to him? Irrationally, of course, but out of desperation. It's just a thought. But for us, we need to go back to this question of forgiveness. And here's where I go back now to the first reading, to Sirach, who's very straightforward about it and stresses the need to forgive. Not only to forgive faults, but also to forgive injustice. Now that's a little harder to take. And if we're talking about the personal realm, which I think Sirach is, to be able to forgive an injustice done to me, it takes a lot of virtue, I think. It takes a lot of courage. What I do not think this means is that we should not strive for social justice. That's a whole other realm. This is really talking about how I personally am treated, I think. The call to struggle for social justice goes beyond the realm of forgiveness. Though, remember the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in South Africa and the ways in which when people acknowledged that they had participated in terrible crimes, the response very often was forgiveness. But that's a very complex thing that perhaps we could think about another time. In the second reading, Paul says that we live and die not for ourselves, but for the Lord. I think we can only do that with openness and simplicity of heart if we're not holding something against somebody else. Haven't you heard the line, I can forgive, but I can't forget? Welcome to the club. Yeah. If forgetting is not an automatic thing. It's not something you just decide to do. But forgiveness is. Forgiveness is a decision. Forgetting is a healing process that can take a long time. So I can forgive, but I can't forget, I think is not an excuse not to forgive. And when we do not forgive, we hold someone hostage. We exercise power over someone by withholding forgiveness, especially when it's asked for. So do we need that kind of power to hold over another? How can we live and die for the Lord if we do that? Remember that every time we say the Our Father, we are asking God to compare how we forgive with how we expect God to forgive. So I suggest that it's worth reading first the gospel And then go back to Sirach and to that short reading from Paul to the Romans to see how capable we are of living it. And on Monday, as we celebrate the Feast of the Holy Cross, perhaps we can continue that reflection about forgiveness, about relationship, with the example that Christ has shown us from the cross and the effect that it had on his mother, Our Lady of Sorrows, the cruelty, the injustice that is done in the world. We can take a stand not to be part of it in our own lives. Can we do that? Only with God's grace, I think. Amen.